nhớ rằng số lên số tưởng đã nó cũng giờ hóa nè cò rằng sẽ trả tàu tôn chỉ này số hóa sự cho nó nếu nó cũng giờ trả lại nhận tôn trâu để nhận ra đến hùa tiệt cho lui chúa cú và hai tiền đấy sẽ đào giờ là công kể là gì nó cũng tiếp lên Sure King walked into the dungeon where Gongchi was held, linked against the pole, his face a bloody mess, hair half down, shirt torn, and standing on nails that had pierced his feet. The hate that burned in Gongchi's eyes was loud and clear as he picked up a pair of pliers on the table. Gunjing tao tia, có như sa hai tiền chơi, có yếu chính trị quý rồi có nâng gì lợ. Sure King said as he worked on the pliers to test out its strength. And then he looked up at Gongchi. Cú chính cho sa hai tia tu nâng nhớ kiện được quý sa, yếu lông tao xế kiến rong bồ lý có. Gongchi smiled through bloody teeth and then laughed. Có sa tia có dưng là nó bỏ. Như có xin trái lìa là từ cú chê cú yếu chủ dân sơ. Để tế nó cú sát tế thế lìa sát tế ở chi tao nữa. Giờ kia thế thua do lửa tu chẳng là dẫn tao chê cú yên ôn ở tế tu sơ. Có những chỉ muốn hướng thịa tao tu nâng nó ý rau. Có sa tia có chơ chào là tế sĩ. Có chẳng những sự lo cho nó nhà bế xua. Sure King smiled and dropped the pliers on the table. He walked to Gongchi and stared at him. Ủa bao nhiêu thế cái tí rong bầu lý có thế cú nó. Giờ đã chỉ thế lý ủa tàu được có lòng xía tùa cú. Cũng do cú những lúc có chấp lời xa. Có lúc cú. Có sao kể lúc giờ đã chỉ. Giờ hả cho. Tôn ta tôn nâng. Có những chỉ chế cho cá cho lửa. Ủa giờ mua kế mù chứ mua kế đó lọ. Chỉ ta li. Có chẳng tao tụi bao tụi xế cũng chờ. Giờ lưng tư cả món nướng bá được cú chế của những ủa xôi giả sư tìa. Nodding, Sure King replied. Xôi giả bóng trong trái lệ sư bây giờ. Dạ. Vì có lúc nữa nè. Vì cũng chờ nữa nè. Giờ tế tế yếu tì đây yếu nhá là cũng nhớ ủa xôi giả của tao nữa. Có bà xa hai tìa. Trái lệ bà cả có ủa xôi giả đó nữa nè mà. Gongchi became silent. Có bà bao lưng thư tao nữa đó xìa. He bent down to his ears. Dạ cú. Nhưng ý chữ dạ cú. Sure King moved away and picked up the pliers again. Khaya lo. Dạ có chữ khaya chả dễ mừng bà cử nè. The sound of Gongchi's cry hit the upper chambers where Jialia was resting, and she sat up, her heart hammering against her chest. She ran out the door where she found the king sitting, nursing a glass of ale and a plate of green grapes. She didn't know what to make of herself at the moment as he looked at her with questioning eyes. Ya Ulija, he asked. Tuya kuno? Kuno? Oh, he answered quickly. Shoking what she saw. She came to sit beside him. Che khó cụ tao wana ôn cái tiếng lo thâu là ba. Tia cụ là thọ gì. Chỉ nhớ cụ khai cao vấn đề để sự sửa kinh trai trái tia. Có yêu giải chỉ tao có lúc xia kể nên tên linh oli nào nhà chỉ tao kể cho kén đã cả. Jialia shook her head and smiled. Chị oli cả. Cô yên trai không cầu vì cụ san tao nhà thâu là. Lúc xí hận đó cô yên sai tia sửa kinh tôi là tia. Có thể linh tao oli đó. Ta chỉ của rong xia hai tia lúc cha nhau họ tia là rong linh nào. Cô qua có cho. He plucked a grape to eat, and then they both turned as Shokin came through the door, his white tunic splattered with blood. He was surprised to see her there, and he stopped walking. The king laughed and stood up, grabbing a towel and tossing it to him. Shokin, sao lọ tí tụi rong đi con mẹ? Có chuyện sai trả có tụi ta ra kiến có là chả? Muốn lông con giờ đi chưa? Thật sự đã lâu, he whispered. He quickly walked out of the room, and Jialia held their breath together as she managed to let her body sink into the chair she was sitting in. Minya, the king said, "Jin hu na mu, tu yo la tu shuo ken za ge rong kia, ji ya ka ma. Ít chữ bắt thấu nữ yêu lo nữ chỉ bảo kể lu. Tí tư một lu nữ kể nữ nhẹ sơn. Cú tụi tú nói chỉ bảo lăng tư lu xuân địa thế tia. Giờ gì nữ ông bảo lên nói ấy có đi lúc họ tua đó là chua cơ, chỉ nữ lu có trai bỏ trai ya. Cú tháo cơ tụ nhá lu nữ. Có chỉ nhỏ có nữ trò kia xia sợ đã lọ. Jialia smiled and nodded. Cú cho lu ở đó lo. He looked in the direction Shuokeng had disappeared off to and said, Mu, kachimu panu. The chamber was warm as Jialia made her way into the room and found Shuokeng sitting in a large basin of water. She closed the door and made her way to him, kneeling down and reaching for the towel. She began to wash him, and he leaned into her touch. Shuokeng, Kegu, Gaboja, Gutsakaheng. He reached for her hand and brought it to his lips. Tsatsagu, Guchuliga, Guronshia de Gategu Data Shikyo. Kanaya Gutsakim Boshwa. Egunjine, Nuhapo Oliga. He sighed and shut his eyes. Gouchi Zakin Zangshia. Jakulukamuya di lao loa. Guyin Jang Chitali. He opened his eyes again. Nu tớ không go. Nu yên trực khai hạt lăng tia lu họp bò. Yali cơ yo Oliga, Guchi cho trẻ. Ya Guchi ua cả ta nó nọ. Chỉ ta kì của những kia tin cầu đá tế. Cậu thia cả tàu cho lu, có rong của xia sưng. He turned to her and touched her chin gently. Kapakusi kaluning. She lowered her gaze and then looked at him. Yo cha thế là yo kusi. Ya kuchen kusi ke. Tức chỉ mò con nào cũng nó. Smiling, he replied. Kusi ye tu neng chính ya. Tư múa ư là sĩ cổng ô lu neng có một cái nhà sưng. Thầu cơ kusi chẳng chỉ cho lửa tu chê thế. Chừng thiệt tấm mừng bỏ lý nó. Cũng chẳng tao tìa ya có chỉ sao ya của tụi ta ra. Thì kusi nhìn chân cả tao cho ya lòng được có chín thế tu. Ô vậy tu cho ya chỉ mò lu tu lu. Bộ chỉ nhau. Laughing, Shuokeng replied, "Ya có nào cụ chỉ nhớ tế có hai đứa chỉ nhau không có. Nếu giờ ý tu vào những cho lên đó. Ya có nào cụ sa cây mò kia có để chấp lợ. Cụ thua cho kiểu trò. Cũng càng sợ nó tuần sáng trả trừ nữa cụ luôn trò kệ." She wrapped her arms around him and he turned to meet her lips. They shared a kiss and he pulled her into the basin to join him. The water spilled and he felt her curves beneath his hands. He ran his hands through her hair, pulling apart the bun that held the strands together. Kapao Jialia. Thảo cũng nhớ được cái sáng chết to, sái cái rong ya tu sa. Khao cũng trai chấp lờ, chỉ khao cũng trai hay tia. Trả tu đan tu, chân yên cụ, cụ sợ lo chỉ bỏ co. Cụ dùng có lưu xuống thế lần đại hành, hoặc là cụ chữ chỉ tàu của tu kinh. Khao tia, cụ tu chỉ sắp cụ kapao đã chỉ son đời cụ, son cụ có tôi chuột gì hốt tại. Thế chỉ vì cũng do có cha khao cụ bao hai tàu lỡ. Cụ thế liệu có bỏ thế bao hai tia cụ chính kia xìa. She touched his face and then leaned her head against his chest. Shuokeng, cô yên chính chân ý lo hai tia, có cho cô chê, do lũ tự oan chơi trận ở chân đùa. Để chỉ có lời dê, cô yên bao mang tia, có yêu chủ trò lo sức thế lý ta. Ô châu con chân của tôi à. Gongchi stirred and felt the soreness over his body as he tried to lift his head up. He forgot the hour and day, but he knew it was morning since the sun had begun pouring its ray in. His arms were aching, and he saw pieces of his fingers on the table. He shut his eyes as the pain lingered in his body parts. Shuokeng had been vicious with him as he tortured to get an answer out of him. But he remained mute and didn't dare utter a single word. His screams had been heard up above, he was sure. Let Jialia know that Shuokeng was the devil himself, and see if she would still embrace him after seeing him covered in his blood. He heard the door creak open and saw someone making their way in. His eyes opened wide as soon as the hood was removed, and he saw who it was. Yaka! Gongchi cried in shock. Lương thì cho có lọ cho hồn à?
Cái sao tia, cụ chỉ bảo cái lúc gì nó lo.
He shook his head, fear already riding hard in his chest. Cụ chỉ tao hãy lo lù li, cụ cho lù có cụ chỉ tao khai ra chữ li.
Cái chỉ tao hay, thì chỉ cái lúc họ mới thức khai tao hay tia, trên đấy tuần đây nó có những dẫn xe ý lý跟dẫn xe nó có được bao nhiêu tia.
Thảo sát tua cụ yên trong trong xoay nhà lù cái thì cụ tao cho chơi.
Từ xe, cụ chỉ cho là.
Gongchi opened his mouth to scream for help, but it was much too late for him, as he saw the flash of light from the dagger, and he felt warm liquid flow down from his neck. Olija Hawatolino, Shukung asked as he stared at the dead body of Gongchi. Beside him stood his uncle and a few men-at-arms. It had been a few hours since death, and his old friend was now beginning to turn blue, no longer the face he once loved. Yatu tono, dolo chosotu. Jimonutun yadorachi, King Yetu said. Gusachi saw that you might not be Tai Gongchi, Bolino. Gongchi the chito hai la lucatuna. Holo chaplo, Monung Bao had their guchin geshia. Te yatan day muna, Gongchi their own church in your kakajan. Do not tell you right so ya. Oli namoye, guda dimo dojo. The king looked away as the men-at-arms began to bury Gongchi. Shokung exhaled a deep breath and turned to his uncle. Dalo, Guya Jialia da Gamu John in eternity. Gusala dear Yaguya John and Takumu, Chayo Chijong, Yakubo de Johnny Toke Chijong, can check Lucia Yochika. Oli la mammy do. Gusa de Hakasa Gala Yijong Gungo. Janu Munyalu Chajong Jaw, Gaya Oli Jalakomali or. Shokung entered the garden to find his wife touching the roses that grew proudly. He planted a kiss on her cheek, and she turned around to smile at him. Nodding, she replied, Nyaka, ora kunyatsakanea. His smile widened. The light in her eyes faded. Vidika, Kuchiyo Kulala? Chiyo. Kuyamuntia Katoka Chungdano. Tata Kuyamuchi Jongdoka. Yakasa Kakumunda Kashia, Yamundaka Netekazinganyo. Tote Kunteta Kachung, Kumatala Taka. She took his hands. Chi Tao. Uyaniatsi, Kamukati Kuyachundakamu. Yakupo had their guy toke chitsa, Kuya King Chitao Gulushia. Yochu Yakupo had their Ganyonda Galonsi, Ganyasan, Gutili, or Tautali Gulushian Cho. Taka Lama go to meet Aja. Taka only go high. She threw her arms around him. Shoking, Gucci King. Tajo Gamu, Gudan Yuno Chitaka Taka. Chakamu Joa, Kuplaka La Didia. Yachimo Kandaku Olune, Guyoja Unanyana. Taka Yakundakamu. He pushed her away gently. Cúi xa cả con thao của mù khưng gạo. Để she cúi ý lên nành sư, mua ở sao tờ sư. Chả cố cắn kể cụ chợ chỉ tàu cả. Cúi ô li chảo nên nhỏ như rồng li nọ. Thao công lòng của hải. Giờ li, có sự khai của sao. Khó chơi có giờ mù đỡ, giờ khó chơi tư có thể đi chụp bút cũng thao có mù. He steadied himself before he replied. Cú mù lũ bà tuôn cho. She gasped loudly and shook her head. Có mù chỉ tao. Lũ bà tuôn cho đỡ. Nên mua tàu mù số nên chỉ mua tàu trọ. Có giờ mù ở đó chỉ nọ. Vì hạt tiền mới từ nên nhỏ hậu thế là bá tàu cũ là sư. Cú lúc họ mua đi ta là. Giờ cũng thiệt chỉ tàu hạt tiền lăng từ giờ tụi chị cả tấm mừng nọ ư đúng đăng như chỉ mua nụ cả. Cú thó có, mlòng cú hại. Cú yên yêu trọ cá lọ sư cú cho lù đó có. Jialia began to cry and she wrapped her arms around him. Shocking. Cú chỉ bảo yêu oli chả lọ. Cú tao tao hạt tiền giờ có chỉ mua kể ư đúng đăng như chỉ mua kể rong. Giờ có mua là chả cú plá có. Cú giờ tụi nhỏ trọ ta cá. Cú giờ oli chả cho có mà lo. He pushed her away and wiped her tears. Sao qua? Giờ có một nhỏ chờ rong là kề, cú thấy là cả xe mù. Giờ con đó cô mù, có giờ cú lúc chờ mua. Cú sáng mù giờ cú bảo hay để có nhỏ luôn xì tàu cú. Thảo có ô lì cú hai mò. Cú giờ chó lò có sai đi sai tàu. Để tế nó có giờ cú lúc tấn kỳ thế có chờ sọ xe. Trên cú. Vatunjoa was a dark valley, 4 mountains and 6 days' ride away. Its history was that anyone who entered could no longer leave because a dark power that resided in there took over the good memories, causing the person to become possessed. Shuking knew that this was a risk, but he had heard of a sorcerer who lived in the depths of the valley who could see the past. He needed to know what had happened and who was behind this war. Since Gongchi's death, there had been quiet all around, but it was when it was silent that he had to raise himself to be alarmed well. There were a lot of things that was hidden and his eyes could not see. He knew that the only way to do this was to send his wife back to her parents, where she was going to be safe. If she was with him, the fear of losing her would be too much on his mind. He would make mistakes, and mistakes would be too costly, especially if it involved her life. The valley held a dark part that he knew would go against all he believed in, but he had no choice. He would have to swallow his fear and face it head on. The night had been a long one for him, even with her by his side. He tossed and turned and had no sleep come to him. It was too close to him this time, and without a solid answer as to who was behind this betrayal, he would never rest. He had his uncle prepare his horse and men-at-arms for him. He planned to have her delivered by his uncle to her parents. He would be sneaking out while she slept, because he couldn't bear to see her eyes as she cried for his return. This time, he felt something was going to be worse, and although he made the promise to return, a part of him knew it would be risky. He had tried to think of another way, but nothing came to mind, and he didn't want to be betrayed again. Once was enough, and it had taken a toll on his life. As he dressed in his armor, he looked at his wife sleeping in bed, her hair around her, breathing softly. His heart broke, and he felt tears fill his eyes. The last time he felt this much pain was when he was bleeding from his wounds in his mother's arms. He had wept and prayed for the pain to disappear. Now as he stood here, he felt as if the world was crashing down on him, and he didn't know how to keep it from falling. If he stayed, nothing would be solved, and he would have to sleep with one eye open at all times. If he went to the valley, he risked losing everything only to find an answer. Could he be strong enough to remember who he was if his memories became tainted with a dark breath? 我找我那时代整地了工，叫lui chúa tuần trâu. Cô và tới cái xe tên này sẽ làm lòng ra đã nâng nào là内容chỉ给了人的骨贴，被马铃声知道啊。